I've never told anyone the full story of what happened on Defeat Ridge back in 2014.
Not my wife. Not my supervisor. I buried the truth deep down, hoping it would just stop moving. But it hasn't.
My name's Harlan. Harlan Bess.
I spent 19 years as a backcountry ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
Mostly on the Tennessee side, up in those high hollows where the trails stop having names. Up there, the fog comes down so thick in October that you can lose a man standing 6 feet right in front of you.
I grew up in Cook County, just outside the park boundary.
My family knew these woods. My dad worked trail maintenance for 30 years, and my granddad knew those ridges like the back of his hand. They could navigate them by feel, in the pitch dark, without even thinking about it. I'm telling you all this so you understand the kind of man I am before I tell you what broke me.
I don't scare easily.
I'm not a guy who sees things that aren't there. It started the way most things in the Smokies start in October. A missing person report. His wife called it in on a Thursday evening when he didn't come home from an 8-mile loop. His name was Gerald Fitch. 61 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Knoxville, and a really experienced day hiker.
His car was still sitting in the trailhead lot and his phone went straight to voicemail.
Weather had been moving in all day long.
We had low cloud cover. Temperatures were dropping fast and visibility was already cutting down to maybe a quarter mile up high.
It was a frustrating but pretty standard situation.
I took point on the search with Marcus Webb, a ranger I'd worked with for 6 years.
Marcus is a good man. Steady. He's exactly the kind of guy you want beside you when a situation goes sideways. He doesn't panic, he doesn't talk too much, and he trusts his gut. We signed out at the trailhead at 8:15 that night, clicked our headlamps on, and started moving up toward the ridge. People always get the silence out here wrong. It's never actually quiet. There's always wind or water or something moving in the brush. But underneath all that, there's this heavy stillness. Like the whole mountain is just holding its breath. My granddad used to call it the listening. Said the woods listen to you before they decide if they're going to let you walk back out. I always thought it was just old man poetry. I stopped thinking that in October of 2014. We hit the 2-mile mark when our lights caught something off the trail. It was Gerald's day pack, just sitting there, perfectly upright against a big tulip poplar. Everything was still inside. His water bottle was half full, and his rain jacket was folded right on top. The temperature had been dropping since 3 o'clock. A guy with 60 years of experience doesn't just fold his jacket and walk away in the freezing cold. He doesn't leave his map behind.
Marcus and I just stood there for a minute. Didn't say a word.
When you work with a guy long enough, you don't need to talk to know what he's thinking.
We both gave each other that look. The one that means something is very, very wrong here.
I got on the radio and called it into dispatch. Gave them our coordinates and told them about the pack. They copied, and that was it. We had to keep moving up the ridge. The trail gets steep after that. It opens onto an exposed ridgeline, and the fog was incredibly thick. You completely lose your sense of space. Say your headlamp beam just dies 10 feet out. Everything else is a breathing wall of gray. We were maybe 40 minutes past the pack when Marcus just froze. Stopped dead in his tracks. His back foot was still off the ground. I almost ran right into him in the dark. I put a hand on his shoulder, about to ask what was going on. But he just held up one finger. Didn't even turn around. It wasn't a hold on a second kind of gesture. It was a stop making sound right now gesture. I stopped breathing and just listened. And then I heard it. Someone calling for help. A man's voice. Coming from way down in the hollow below the ridge. The words were blurring together, like he'd been shouting for hours. It wasn't a crisp call for help, just this worn-down, exhausted, half-conscious loop.
Help. Please. Help me.
Marcus and I just traded a look.
Seemed like a textbook scenario, honestly.
Say a hiker wanders off the trail, gets turned around in the fog, and ends up stuck in a hollow.
We marked our spot on the GPS and got moving. We stepped off the trail and headed down toward the voice.
Now, the hollow below Defeat Ridge is a nasty place, even in broad daylight. In the pitch black of an October night,
It felt like stepping right off the edge of the world.
the ground down there is soft, uneven, and just full of hidden drainage channels.
Stuff that doesn't show up on any map. Every single step was a gamble in the dark.
We had to test our footing constantly just to keep from breaking an ankle. The brush got thicker the deeper we went, turned into these massive, tangled rhododendron thickets. In some spots, we literally had to crawl on our hands and knees to push through.
With our headlamps barely cutting the fog, the claustrophobia was suffocating.
I'm not embarrassed to admit it. Even experienced guys feel the dark sometimes.
The back of my neck was prickling the whole way down.
We pushed toward that voice for a solid 15 minutes. I kept calling out, telling him to hang on, that we were coming.
And the voice just kept answering us from the white void.
I noticed the pattern. It kept calling out with the exact same desperate rhythm.
Help! Please! Over here! Help me!
It was the only thing anchoring us in that mess.
We were about to push through another thicket when Marcus grabbed my arm. His grip was like a vice.
You stopped me dead in my tracks.
Didn't say a word at first, just held me there in the freezing dark. Marcus leaned in so close his mouth was right at my ear. When he spoke, his voice was barely a breath. He sounded completely stripped of his usual calm.
He whispered, "Harlan, it's not getting closer."
I stood perfectly still in the mud and just listened. A cold wave of realization washed over me. We've been hiking toward that voice for 15 minutes.
But it sounded exactly as far away as it had from the ridge.
I stood there in the freezing mud, just processing what Marcus said.
And this thought just rises up through all my years of training.
It was undeniable. That is not Gerald Fitch down there.
I couldn't even tell you exactly how I knew. Maybe it was the distance, never changing. Or maybe it was the voice itself.
It sounded like a recording played at the wrong speed.
Like something just mimicking a human.
It hit that deep animal part of the brain.
The part that evolved from thousands of years of being prey.
Your gut just knows before your brain even catches up.
Every nerve in my body was screaming at me.
Don't go closer.
I leaned in close to Marcus, put my mouth right against his ear so the sound wouldn't carry.
I didn't ask for his opinion.
I just said, we're going back up to the trail.
Right now. And quietly.
Marcus didn't argue. He didn't question it at all. He just gave this slow, tight nod.
That told me everything.
He felt it too.
We turned around and started climbing back up, moving as carefully as we could,
Trying not to slip on the wet leaves.
We didn't want to make a single sound.
Every snapped twig felt definite.
As we moved away, the voice kept calling.
But then it changed.
It stopped asking for help.
It called our names. First Harlan, then Marcus. The whole tone of the voice shifted. The distress was just gone,
Replaced by this cold, calculating awareness.
like something that had been playing a role.
And just decided it didn't need to pretend anymore. I won't lie to you.
Saying that last 100 yards were terrifying. We moved as fast as we safely could in the dark.
We didn't run, because running gets you killed.
but we moved with a desperate urgency.
We finally hit the tree line at the ridge.
The second we stepped onto the trail, the voice just stopped. Mid-call, like a door slamming shut.
We just stood there, catching our breath.
Not saying a word.
I pulled my radio and called dispatch. I told them we checked out a possible voice in the hollow and found absolutely nothing.
It was the most dishonest, accurate sentence I've ever spoken.
We kept moving up the ridge toward the summit.
The fog was still so thick it swallowed our lights just a few feet ahead. Neither of us said a word about what we'd just heard.
About 40 minutes later, our lights finally hit something.
It was Gerald Fitch.
He was alive, and he'd actually never left the trail.
He just slipped on a wet root and dragged himself under a rock overhang.
He'd been sitting there, freezing, for 5 hours.
He was scared, and his ankle was swollen bad, but he was completely coherent.
Seeing a real, living person just broke that suffocating tension we'd been carrying.
We asked him about the shouting.
He told us he hadn't called for help in hours.
His voice gave out early on, so he just conserved his energy and waited for rescue like a smart hiker.
So he was completely silent when we heard that voice down in the hollow. Marcus and I didn't even look at each other. We didn't need to. We both knew exactly what that meant.
We just got to work.
We used some bandages and sturdy branches to rig up a makeshift splint for his ankle.
We moved fast, letting our training take over so we wouldn't have to think. Once the splint was tight, we hauled him upright between us.
He threw his arms over our shoulders to keep the weight off his bad foot, and we started the long trek back down.
It took 2.5 hours to get down.
The fog never lifted, and the hollow stayed dead quiet.
Gerald talked the entire way.
Just nervous, embarrassed chatter from a guy who'd been alone too long.
We just let him talk. Honestly, it helped all three of us.
Having a real, normal human voice in our ears was the only thing keeping that awful mountain silence away, until we hit the trailhead.
Marcus put his transfer request in about 4 months later.
He moved up to the admin office in Gatlinburg, doing paperwork and visitor services.
He never went back out on backcountry patrol.
We still talk sometimes, mostly about football and his grandkids.
But it's that careful kind of conversation that completely avoids one specific October night. We've never actually discussed what happened down in that hollow.
I know exactly why he won't bring it up.
If I called him tonight and just said the words Defeat Ridge, he'd go dead quiet. And that silence would confirm everything I've never been able to prove.
Because here's the thing I just can't shake.
It's the part that follows me into every single room I walk into. When that voice called our names in that knowing tone, I actually stopped.
I stopped for just 1 second while the others kept moving.
And in that moment, I swept my headlamp in a slow arc back down into the hollow. The beam just cut right through that suffocating darkness. The fog swallowed everything beyond 10 feet.
I saw the rhododendron and the wet gray shapes of those massive boulders.
Just a skeletal tangle of bare branches against the white nothingness. And right at the edge of my headlamp's reach, where the light died,
I saw something standing between 2 trees.
It was tall, way taller than it should have been.
My brain just instantly registered that something was completely wrong. It was completely unnaturally still. Not the way living things are still, you know?
There was no sway, no breath, no movement at all.
It was just standing there, watching me. It didn't have a face that I could see, but it was definitely facing me.
I'm as certain of that as I am of anything. And what I felt in my chest wasn't terror.
It was recognition. It felt like something that actually knew me, like it had been waiting specifically for me to look back. I turned around, put one foot in front of the other, and I didn't run. I just caught up to the guys and never looked back again.
If you've been carrying something like this, something you found in the dark that you've never said out loud, I need you to share it.
Not because it's a good story, but because someone else might have felt that exact same recognition.
They're probably carrying it completely alone, the exact same way I did for 12 long years. They need to know they aren't crazy. They need to know the hollow is real.
I officially retired from the Park Service back in 2021.
I told everyone it was just bad knees, mostly.
But anyone who's known me long enough understands that's not the whole truth. My wife knows I just don't talk about the Smokies anymore. She doesn't push it. She knows I left a piece of myself up on that ridge. My youngest daughter still hikes up there with her friends. I always smile and tell her to be careful. But I never tell her to stay off Defeat Ridge.
I don't tell her what lives in the hollow below it, because honestly, she wouldn't believe me.
And honestly,
There's a real mercy in not knowing.
we live down in a valley now, deliberately far away from the high elevation.
But sometimes, when the fog comes in low right here at home, I stand at this window and just watch the gray settle over the tree line.
And I can't help but think about that moment at the edge of the light.
That impossible height. That absolute, unnatural stillness.
It already knew exactly who I was when I walked up that mountain.
I've thought a lot about what that actually means.
About whether something like that remembers you, and if it's still standing there in the dark, waiting for me to come back. I'm never gonna go back up there. I'm done.
But I think on some nights, it knows that too.
The thing about these mountains is they don't care about us.
They were here long before we started cutting trails.
And they'll be here long after we're gone.
I keep the jacket right by the door. I don't know why, honestly.
Maybe it's just a reminder of who I used to be.
Or maybe it's a reminder of why I stopped. The fog always finds its way down into the valley, eventually.
You can move away from the elevation, but you can't outrun the weather.
It just kind of seeps into everything. People ask me what they should do if they ever get lost out there.
I always tell them the same thing. Stay put. Wait for daylight.
But if you're out there in the dark and you hear somebody calling your name,
And it sounds just a little bit off.
you don't answer. You just keep walking.
The Smokies are beautiful,
I'm not trying to tell you they aren't.
but they demand a certain kind of respect.
Because the minute you forget where you are, the woods will remind you. I've made my peace with it. Mostly. I've got my house, I've got my family, and I've got a whole lot of miles between me and that ridge. But every now and then, when the wind hits the house just right, I swear I can hear it. Just a whisper.
Just enough to let me know it's still out there.
Waiting in the dark.
Standing perfectly still.
Remembering my name. So if you're heading up there this season, be careful.
Keep your headlamp charged.
And whatever you do, don't go looking for the hollow. I've thought a lot about what that moment actually meant. About what it means to be recognized by something that shouldn't even exist.
You lock your doors, you turn off the lights, and you try to convince yourself you're safe.
But the truth is, you never really leave the woods behind. They get inside your head, and they set up camp right there in the dark. I catch myself wondering if that thing out there remembers me.
People think the mountains are just rocks and trees. They don't realize how old this land is, or how much it holds on to. It's got a memory longer than anything we can comprehend.
Sometimes I look out at the fog rolling into this valley,
And I can't help but picture that hollow below Defeat Ridge.
I picture the exact spot where my headlamp died. I wonder if it's still standing there.
Right between those two ancient trees. Perfectly still.
just waiting in the pitch black where the light no longer shines. Waiting for me to come back. Waiting for the guy who looked it right in the face and walked away.
It knows my name, and it knows what I felt that night.
I'm never going back up there.
I gave 19 years of my life to those ridges, and that's all they're gonna get.
I'm done. My wife knows not to ask.
My kids know I don't hike anymore.
I've made my peace with staying down here in the valley. I'm not going back to Defeat Ridge. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever.
But when the fog rolls in thick like this,
I think on some nights, that thing out there knows it too.
it knows I'm never coming back to that ridge. So it's just gonna keep waiting in the dark.
I thought about that moment a lot over the years.
Just sitting here, trying to wrap my head around what it actually means.
What it means to be recognized by something that shouldn't even exist. You start wondering if a thing like that actually has a memory.
If it holds on to the faces of the people who cross its path in the dark.
Or if it just absorbs them into the woods. Sometimes I close my eyes and I can still picture those dark hollows up on the ridge.
Just miles and miles of dead leaves, twisted roots, and freezing fog. A place where time doesn't really work the way it's supposed to. And I wonder if it's still out there right now. Just standing perfectly still between those same two trees.
Not breathing, not moving, just watching the tree line. Just waiting right there at the edge of a headlamp beam that burned out a dozen years ago. Stuck in that one specific moment in time.
Holding on to that 1 second of recognition. Like it's just standing there in the pitch black, patiently waiting.
Waiting for me to finally lose my mind and come back up the mountain. Waiting to finish whatever started that night.
But I'm never going back up there.
I made my peace with that a long time ago. I'm staying right here in the valley, where it's safe and the lights work.
But on the really quiet nights, when the mist rolls down off the peaks
and settles heavy around the edge of the house,
I get this heavy feeling right in the center of my chest.
It's this quiet, absolute certainty.
A feeling that travels all the way down the mountain and finds me right here in the dark.
It knows I'm not coming back. And the scariest part is,
I think it's just gonna keep waiting anyway. Some things out there just don't know how to stop.